Hello, everybody, and welcome to another question and answer session. This one is all about building a great portfolio. And thumbs up to everyone who is here, because if you are here, you probably know by now that one of the best ways you can land great instructional design opportunities is by putting together a really strong portfolio. If you're looking for a corporate role or freelance opportunities, a strong portfolio trumps any education or certificate programs you can do. So I've been long awaiting this session, and I'm really happy to share all of my best portfolio tips for you all. In case anyone is new to these weekly sessions or is just meeting me, I started my freelance instructional design and e-learning business in 2017 when I started my master's degree. And my success every step of the way has been directly proportionate to the state of my portfolio. And along the way, I've also helped many other instructional designers put together strong portfolio sites and land some really good corporate jobs. So I'm going to share everything I know from those experiences. And I've also been collecting some data from hiring managers about what they're looking for when they make that hiring decision and how they evaluate a portfolio. So I hope to bring in some of that raw data as well to this discussion. I've seen some great questions here already. So if you do have a question, please use that Ask a Question tab at the bottom and upvote the questions you'd like to see answered. And finally, today is an exciting day for me because all of that portfolio help I've put together into an instructional design portfolio bootcamp where I give a lot of one-on-one support, personalized feedback, weekly workshops, and a whole lot of content all about portfolio building. So if you hear me mention that, that's what I'm referring to. And enrollment is officially open for that, and it will be open until next week. So what better way to announce the launch than with a nice session like this where we can dive into all of the portfolio building details. So let's get started here. I'm just going to dive into the questions. And again, feel free to add those questions as we go and vote up the ones you want to see answered first. So our first question is from Patty. And I see this question all the time. Patty says, most of my instructional design experience includes confidential or proprietary material. Do I have any suggestions for using or modifying it to use on a portfolio? And I completely get this. From experienced IDs, the problem always seems to be that all of the work they've been doing for years is locked behind these non-disclosure agreements, or it's confidential because it's for their employer. So two options here. So one option, of course, is to create personal projects, right? Create projects that are in line with the work you want to be doing and the work you want to be known for. But that obviously takes a lot more effort, especially if you just want to show off something you've already done. So option number two is to, what I like to call, sanitize that project. So we want to get rid of any of that proprietary information. So this includes the logo. So maybe replace the company's logo with a fictitious logo that you can find on any kind of stock image site, or maybe it's a logo you just spend a few minutes creating. It doesn't have to be anything super fancy. You can also swap out the color scheme. So if the colors you choose are very on brand for the company that you've been working for, you can swap that out with a different color scheme to make it match this new fictitious brand that you've created. And the content also is likely proprietary. So if you can swap out that content with lorem ipsum text, that's a good way to just show off the visual design skills you're using. Or, depending on how much work you want to put into it, I guess you could create some new content for it. But I would probably just use lorem ipsum, this Latin filler text, since it's probably the, it's the visual design that's important, it's the interactions you've done. And you can talk about what the actual purpose of the project was in your project write-up. So good question, Patty. I hope that helped. You can feel free to add more questions about that if you have any. Okay, we have this question from Robbie, and Robbie is asking, how complex should the samples in your portfolio be? And this is a good question. This is important, okay? So you've likely seen portfolios with projects of varying complexity, right? You've probably seen some hour-long e-learning courses, and you've seen some where it's just a one-slide interaction. And here's the recommendation I have when it comes to which projects to include. So the first project, this is what I like to call the flagship project. This is the one where you're going to show off the full range of your instructional design skill set. So you're going to show that you can analyze a situation and determine whether or not a learning solution is a good fit. So you're going to show basically how you can use your instructional design skill set to solve a real world problem, okay? Because this is important. In this survey I did, I asked a question. Let me look at it really quickly. I asked a question, in order of importance, what do you consider when evaluating an instructional designer's portfolio? And the number one response here, I can actually share my screen if you guys want to see this. Then, okay, here's the question. The number one, and again, this is only 43 hiring managers, so we don't have a ton of data yet, but ability to solve real world problems with instructional design, that's the number one thing that these hiring managers are looking for when they evaluate an instructional designer's portfolio. So that doesn't need to, that you need to develop some super comprehensive like learning ecosystem solution. It just needs to show that you've analyzed the situation, you've identified a good solution for it, you used your instructional design skill set, like by talking to SMEs, creating an action map, writing learning objectives, whatever your process is, but you did use an instructional design process, and maybe you created a storyboard and then developed an e-learning solution. Because at the end of the day, that also is very much what hiring managers are looking for. I mean, since we're talking about this survey data, just take a look at this. Like, it's pretty eye-opening. So we asked about the top 3 skills you look for when hiring an instructional designer. E-learning development comes in. 80% of the respondents included e-learning development. So that's why, like, we typically want to find problems that we can solve with e-learning solutions. And then, what are the top 3 tools and technologies that instructional designers should be familiar with upon hire? Almost 90% of the respondents included Articulate Storyline. So I hear this a lot. People are like, should we learn Storyline or Captivate? Here's Captivate down here with 16% of the respondents. So like nothing else even comes close to this. So if anyone's wondering what tools should I use to build projects for my portfolio, I mean, I think this is a very clear winner here. It's what the market is asking for. And I do want to caveat this with look at this, 80% of these respondents are hiring for the corporate space. So if you're looking at government roles, it might be a bit different. So I'll post a full report with all of this data once I have at least 100 responses from hiring managers, but hopefully that data is helping give some insight. So I hope that helps. That's that flagship project. I think more of the work will be in identifying a real problem to solve and making sure it's a problem you know enough about to create a good solution for. But the actual e-learning solution itself, I'd say if you can get a solid 5 questions with some good context, that's enough. Like the sample itself doesn't need to be an hour long, because realistically, hiring managers aren't going to be going through an hour-long e-learning experience. They'll maybe click through your slides to see how it's visually designed, evaluate a multiple choice question or two, and see and read about your overall approach to solving the problem. But the e-learning experience itself does not need to be very long. So that's the flagship project. That's going to be the first and most viewed project that hiring managers or potential clients look at. And a lot of the times that will be all that they need to see. Okay, but then you also want to include at least a couple of what I like to call supporting projects. So these are the projects that show off maybe your specialization within instructional design. And if you don't have, so for example, if you really like storyboarding, maybe your supporting projects are some storyboards and you want to really show off that instructional design skill set, and you don't necessarily want to develop it out and build an e-learning interaction. That's fine. It's showing that you're really good at storyboarding. Same thing with XAPI. If you're really into data collection or data visualization, include some supporting projects that show that off. Because this flagship project, that's gonna check all of the boxes when it comes to making sure you get the base level of credibility for a job and for an interview. If you don't really have a specialization and you're like, I just want to get a corporate job, I don't really care what I specialize in, then I'd say the best supporting projects you can create are these little 1 to 3 slide e-learning interactions that look really nice. Because visual design, like we've been talking about how there are a lot of people in the instructional design job market. There are all these people coming into the field. If you have good visual design skills, that is going to instantly set you apart when someone comes to your website or comes to your project. I mean, we're very visual creatures as human beings. So we make a lot of snap judgments about quality and competency and all of that good stuff based off of how something looks. So with those supporting projects, if you can show off that you can use strong visual design skills and design a nice looking interaction, those projects don't need to take you very long, maybe a week, start to finish, mock up the visual design and then actually develop the interactivity and storyline. But those supporting projects will go a very long way in helping you get hired. Like if you have those 3 projects in your portfolio and everything looks good and is like instructionally sound, I cannot imagine you not getting a great instructional design job. That's what the market is like right now. So I hope that helped answer that question, Robbie. That was a great question. I love talking about the different types of projects that you should include. All right, the next question is from Dorota. What are the best platforms or ways to host a portfolio for free or at a very affordable price? Dorota is using WordPress now, but she's wondering if there is a better option. So there are some very low cost. Okay, so first let's talk about what you need to host a portfolio. So the first thing you need is a domain, right? Like you don't want to use one of these default names like devlinpeck.wixsites.com. Like that's not good. That's not very professional. It doesn't really show much attention to detail. So that's the minimum thing you need is a domain name. First name, last name.com. Get that if you can. If you have a common name, you might need to be a bit more creative with it. Or if you have a very long name, you might need to be more creative with it. So grab your domain name. That usually runs about $12 US per year. At least that's what it is in the US. I don't know if the price varies depending on where you are in the world. I know we have a very global audience here. But yeah, so that's the minimum you'll need. That's about $12 a year. The next thing that is pretty much required is that you need a server where you can host your website. If you're not familiar with what a server is, it's basically just someone else's computer. So you can pay for a part of that server where your website will live so that whenever anyone goes to that domain, they'll get served your website. Now, if all you need is, buying the server itself is pretty cheap. There are tools like iPage and I think Bluehost, and you can probably get a server for as little as like a few dollars a month, depending on how many years you pay at once. So those are the 2. You need the servers, you need the domain. But also you need to actually create your website. You need a way to build the website. Now, if you're building that site with custom code or a tool like WordPress.org that's open source, you can just host it right on your servers and you don't need to actually pay for anything else. But since a lot of people don't want to actually play around with the servers or get exposed to the back end or learn how to hook all of that stuff up, that's where these other site builders come in. A lot of the site builders like Wix or Squarespace, the servers, they manage the servers. They have the servers built in on their back end. So you can create the website and then host the website and even buy the domain all from their platform. So those all done for you tools are more expensive, but they make it a lot easier and remove a lot of headaches. Now, there is one tool that is very easy to use, completely free, both hosting and creating the website. And you can get a pretty simple site up, relatively quickly, and that is Google Sites. So that's like the cheapest option I know of where it's very easy, it's hosted for you, and you don't need to pay for anything other than your custom domain. The problem with that is that it is very limited in like the customization that you can do. So if you want to just get something up fast and for very cheap, Google Sites is a really good option, but not the best option if you want to have this really custom look and feel, or you want to actually design the site yourself. Okay, so that's it. And then WordPress.org, again, all you need to use that is this server. But a lot of the times people will buy custom WordPress themes that make it easier to actually develop a nice looking website with WordPress. So everything has trade-offs. Squarespace, if you're looking for a really easy tool done for you to create a great looking website, I'd recommend Squarespace over Wix. Don't know if we want to get into that, but again, that's more expensive because you're paying for the ease of use. Yeah, Sixto asked about Hostgator. That's another tool you can use to easily host your website. So that's where you can get the hosting or the servers. And Webflow. Webflow is what I use. I love Webflow. I recommend it a lot, but it does have a higher learning curve if you're new to web development, and it isn't the cheapest option. But once you know how to use the tool, you have endless customization options. You can use it in the same way that you can use custom code once you know how to use their interface. And it's a visual interface, but you're actually editing the code visually, if that makes sense. Look into it, but slightly more complex, but worth it. Whew. All right, good question. Let me take a sip of coffee. Good stuff. Let's see what we have next. Another question from Robbie here. Do I recommend showcasing different software/programs, or is it fine to have everything in the same course building platform? Sarah, I see you mentioned what about WordPress with Elementor? Yeah, Elementor is one of those very common themes that people use to modify their WordPress sites and make them look great. But okay, back to Robbie's question about showcasing different software. Robbie, I think from the survey that we just looked at, where you can see that 90% of hiring managers are looking for Articulate Storyline, you probably don't need to show off something done in Captivate. And vice versa. If you're really good with Captivate, odds are if you're really good with Captivate and you can show that off in your portfolio, and these potential employers or clients see that you can create a functional e-learning module or experience, that's not going to hold you back. And especially if you're coming from Captivate, like Storyline is much easier to use. So if it's required that you have to use Storyline, you can pick Storyline up super quickly coming from Captivate. And I came from Captivate as well, and I was like, yeah, this is like so much faster and easier. But good stuff. Now, as far as whether or not you want to showcase different e-learning artifacts, that's another question. I mean, the vast majority of the demand right now is self-paced e-learning with Articulate Storyline. That's what I originally had a portfolio that showed off some like face-to-face experiences, some infographics, some podcasts, like all sorts of stuff. But I started finding that everyone who reached out to me, they just wanted the self-paced e-learning. And it's also what I like doing the most. So for years now, my portfolio has just all been Storyline projects. And some of them do include some narration or some infographics and other like supporting elements like that. And I think that's very good to show off if you can. Like job aids can do better what we're using e-learning to do a lot of right now in the corporate space. So if you can get good at creating these nice, visually appealing, easy to consume one-page job aids, it can only help you to include that in your portfolio site. And again, if you're good at storyboarding, or if you're good at doing these other pieces of the learning and development process, like it can only help you to include them in your portfolio, I would say. But don't include any of that at the expense of this self-paced Articulate Storyline projects, because that's, I mean, at least if you're looking for a corporate role, that's what's going to do the heavy lifting for you. Good stuff. Okay, I have a question from Adam here. How do we increase our chances of recognition or being passed along by recruiters when transitioning to the instructional design field? Adam, I think that's the whole point of this session. The way to stand out in this field, in the corporate or freelance space, is to have a portfolio that shows off what you can do. So let me show you another question here. And let's look at the data again, because I think this will help with that question. So we have this question: what are the top 3 things that you consider when evaluating an instructional designer for a role? So the first thing right here is professional experience. Again, we want people who are experienced. That's the corporate curse. To get the job, you need experience, but to get experience, you need to have experience, right? But don't be intimidated by this, because there are plenty of people who I've helped break into this field who didn't have any formal instructional design experience, but because of the strength of their portfolio, which, as you can see here, people are ranking this, some people value the portfolio more than they value an interview, which I was very surprised at. I thought interview would be number 1, portfolio number 2, and experience number 3. But portfolio at the current point in time is even beating out an interview. And education, you can see like education is a very, very distant competitor. And cover letters, looks like that's not going to make or break your whether or not you get the role. But the thing is to get an interview. Oh, that's not what I even wanted to show you initially. So let me show you something else. So I have a question about this. What role does an instructional designer's portfolio play in the hiring decision? So 60% of the people sometimes consider hiring an applicant without a portfolio, but it still plays a significant role in the hiring decision. And 20% of the people, if you don't have a portfolio, they're not even going to consider your application. So, and that's why I bring this up, because I've heard from a lot of hiring managers that if they don't see that portfolio link at the top of your resume, they're just going to go on to the next resume, because they want to see what it is that you can do. Again, they don't just want to see how many years you have on a resume. some hiring managers. I mean, now that we have some raw data, we can get some deeper insights. And it seems like for 20%, the portfolio doesn't play as big of a role. I think we'll be able to paint a much clearer picture when we break this down by industry, because I have a feeling that those people may not be in the corporate space. So good stuff. I mean, I hope this data is helping. Helena, again, yeah, I might have worded that wrong. I don't think this data is necessarily saying that the portfolio is more important than the interview, but more of the respondents included a portfolio as one of the top things that they consider when hiring an ID than those that included an interview. Again, very surprising, not what I would expect, but yeah, again, that Patsy sums it up. The portfolio shows what you can do, and in the corporate space, that's what it's all about. Do you have the skills to help us produce the deliverables we need? That's the current culture of these learning departments, for better or worse. It's great for us because we know exactly what needs to be done to land the role. But then once you're in there and you want to actually start producing some change and creating some more meaningful products for the actual end and the actual employees or the actual learners, that's another battle to fight. So Samir asked, can the portfolio? Oh, well, sorry, I know I don't usually take questions from the chat, so we'll stick to the ones that are being upvoted. So Adam, to answer your question, how to increase your chances of recognition, create a great portfolio and link to it right at the top of your resume, because that's what's going to make you stand out, and that's what's going to get you callbacks for interviews. Okay, question from Nick here. Nick asks, what kind of interaction should be included in a portfolio? Is it preferred to point out the solution of a problem with learning data analysis rather than a simple interaction? So Nick, this is a great question. If you're trying to land a corporate instructional design role where your job is going to be creating e-learning, which is what most of the corporate roles are right now, I would say you really should have this flagship project that shows off at the end stage that you actually built the thing and articulate storyline, you developed it, you showed off the graphics. So I think this gets to Samir's question as well. Like you do want to have at least one kind of e-learning experience that people can engage with, because that's going to be most closely aligned with what you're going to be doing in a full-time corporate ID role. If, however, you want to be an independent consultant or you're looking for some more niche roles, it's really up to you what kind of projects you include on your portfolio site. So if you want to be doing this independent consulting where the clients you work with your whole job is to solve these problems by collecting and analyzing learning data, it's completely fine and even better to have a portfolio that's completely dedicated to that. But that's where you're getting into a very specific specialization, and it's kind of like that's your competitive advantage. You're disqualifying all of this e-learning development work because you would only want this learning data work. Okay? So that is up to you. Again, it really depends on your goals. If you want to be known as this learning data guy who can solve problems with data, go 100% on that, right? But if you want to increase your odds at breaking into that corporate ID space and landing a high-paying role as quickly as you can, essentially, then you're going to need to show off some e-learning development skills. But good question, Nick. And the last thing on, sorry, I accidentally marked a question as answered, but I just wanted to add one more note about that, Nick, if you're more interested in the data analysis and data collection, those would be great supporting projects to have. So have this one catch-all at the top, the flagship project, where you show off the full range of your ID and e-learning development skill set. And then you can have supporting projects that show off this more niche, specialized data skill set. So let me just find the question that I accidentally closed down. So I think the question that I accidentally closed down is from Jim Brown, and let me get back to it. Sorry for the hiccup. So Jim Brown asked, what criteria do you use to evaluate a portfolio item and or the entire portfolio? What does quality look like, and how do you know a quality portfolio when you see it? So Jim, since you use the word you here, I'm going to guess that you're asking what I'm looking for, but I think we've been really driving home this point about what hiring managers are looking for throughout this Q&A. So what I'm looking for, I think the first thing I will notice is where the person's visual design skills at. Okay, and people, like I've received a lot of people's first projects, the first things that they build. And when you see that first project, you know how much effort that person will have to spend on the visual design side of things to become competitive in the market, I would say. So that's the first striking thing. Like, do they understand contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity? Do they know how to use white space? Do they understand hierarchy? Like, is my attention going where it's supposed to go when I look at this page? Am I confused about what I need to click to access the project or to learn more about the project? So these like user experience, visual design things, I mean, they're the most striking thing because it's the first thing you experience. I think the next thing I look for is, I want to see the projects themselves. Like, does this person have an actual instructional design skill set, or do they just know how to use Articulate Storyline? Because, just knowing Articulate Storyline, you can probably land a job with that, but that doesn't exactly make you a credible instructional designer. It just shows that you know how to use an authoring tool. So that's where that flagship project really comes in, because it shows I understand what kind of problems instructional designers can solve, and I use the full scope of my skill set to solve this real world problem. So that is a big thing I look for, and I'm guessing many other people in the industry who know how to sift through the noise a bit. Like, is this person credible, or is this person just throwing something together? So that's what I look for. Do you know how to solve real problems with your ID skill set? Development skills I look at probably after that. Like, where are this person's development skills at? Are they just using a template where they're swapping out some text and some images? Are they just using built-in question slides and built-in interaction types? Or is this person actually building things from scratch? And the follow-up on that is, does this person know how to use variables and conditions to build some more complex interactions? Because you can do a lot with Storyline, but not very much if you're just sticking to the templates and the built-in interaction types. So those are the main things I'm looking at. Can they make things that look nice and are designed well to be consumed, so that I'm not confused when I'm looking at it or trying to understand it? Does this person know what ID can solve, and where are their development skills at? Like, would I be able to trust this person if I were to outsource some stuff to them that required a lot of custom development, which is pretty much all I do. All right, so I hope that was helpful. That was a great question, Jim. Another great question from Robbie. Robbie, you got all these questions in early, and I'm glad you did. So Robbie asks, how much emphasis should be placed on detailing the whole process versus the final product itself? This is a good question, Robbie. I think both of them are very important. Like, if I were to assign importance to them, I would say like 50% and 50%. Okay. What you will hear a lot from hiring managers and from people who have to evaluate instructional design portfolios on a daily basis is that when you just see the final product and the person just links to this, full experience, you have no idea what this person actually did in that final product. Like, you don't know, did they start with analysis and identify the solution and then bring it through the whole way through? Or did they just copy and paste some text boxes on after someone else designed and developed the whole thing? Like, you really have no idea. And I've heard some horror stories where people ask these people in an interview, like, what did you do for this project? And they're like, oh, I fixed this thing on this one slide. So you see, that can be kind of deceptive. So you can have a beautiful final product, but I think a lot of hiring managers will come at that with a level of distrust or apprehension. Like, what did you actually do for this? We don't really know. So that's why you need that process write-up where you talk about, here is why this project came to me. Here is the problem it was supposed to solve. Here is step-by-step the approach I used to design and develop this solution. And if you didn't design it or you didn't do the analysis, you talk about that. They came to me with this storyboard and needed someone to develop it. I actually developed it. So they're equally important. You can't have one without the other. I mean, you can't actually have one without the other. Like, a lot of portfolios, and my portfolio lately, a lot of the time you can't access the final product. Although I would recommend, if you don't have a lot of content and logos and stuff and testimonials like I do, you do want to actually show off the final product. And I'm always reworking my website, and I think I am going to rework it a bit to make those final products available again. But I guess my idea was that is I'll just include all these videos and screenshots throughout the process write-up so that someone doesn't need to actually go through it and experience it themselves. But there is definite value in being able to experience it yourself. So equal importance. And if you're wondering how that looks, I mean, I can actually, why don't I share my screen? I think we're doing good on time. I know I talk really quickly, so hopefully, hopefully I'm not boring anyone or losing anyone. But so let's go to my portfolio. So this is a new project that I just launched. This is a client project, so I'm not linking to the full experience. Like, you're not going to get that full project here. So you see here, it's like a 1-sentence summary about what the project is. I talk about my responsibilities. I talk about who the audience is. I talk about which tools I use and who the client is. So you see, like, at a glance, a potential client can see, okay, this is what this guy did. Here are the tools he used. Oh, good. Our team uses Storyline. This is just what we need. Oh, Vyond, perfect. Yeah, we use that tool as well. So you want to give this like little at a glance overview so someone can determine whether or not they want to keep reading. Then we have this overview. I say why the client came to me. I talk about the solution I proposed, and then I go step by step and talk about how I designed that solution. So you can see here, I just have this GIF where you can see like the blood lead level rise. I talk about how this is like gamified, you know, so you can get like a little demos of the experience, even though you can't experience the full thing for yourself. So here I talk about my process. I designed and developed this, working closely with the experts at Tech. Here's the tool I use. I created an action map. I created a text-based storyboard. I created a prototype and got feedback on it before we moved forward. And then we designed and developed the final product. Here are my results and takeaways at the end. And you see I include those screenshots throughout. So on some other projects I have, like the personal projects, and a couple of them I think I have like a link to experience the full project. Let me actually show you that too, like while we're at it, just so you can see what that might look like if you're not familiar with it. So like if we go to this one right here where we have this overview, you see this blue, this bold link, experience the project. So if we open that up, now we can actually get into this thing and play around with it. So obviously if you're doing real client projects, that's not always going to be an option. All right, good question, Robbie. Our next question is from April. And April asks, if we don't have experience with Articulate Rise or Storyline yet, should we practice with that first and then try to create a portfolio? Or do you think we can begin to create a portfolio as we're learning? That's a great question, April. Now, I think a lot of this will have to do with where your visual design skills at and how comfortable you can get with Storyline. So like a lot of people, they want to get a portfolio up really quickly so that they can actually start getting a response to their corporate instructional design applications. So if your visual design skills are not very developed, that can come back to bite you. Because honestly, if you have a portfolio piece that is very poorly designed or in poor taste, it can actually hurt you. I mean, someone on this survey had a really great comment about that, and I think I want to share that with you all if you're interested. Let me scroll down and find it, because I think this person summed it up really well. Give me 1 second. I didn't realize how many responses we had gotten here. Okay. I'm sorry this is taking a minute. I mean, let me know in the chat if you want to see this, and I can find it. I think it'll take me just a minute or so. But I think the gist of it was essentially like a lot of the portfolios this person has seen they've really backfired on the applicants because the visual design was really suffering, or he also pointed out that, okay, you guys want to see it? I'll just show. I want to do it justice because this is from a hiring manager themselves. It's going to be better than what I can just tell you from memory. Okay, so the question is, would you like to share anything else about how you evaluate an instructional designer's portfolio? So that's the question. I haven't even had time to review all these responses yet, but this one came in early, so I think and it really stuck with me. Okay, I found it. So here's the quote. So this person says, most of the portfolios I've reviewed often backfired on the applicants because they were very poor quality or very poor in taste. Others showed that the applicant was more of a graphic designer than an instructional designer and almost lured my hiring team in by amazing visuals while they ignored the other skill sets needed for the role. I've yet to see a successful portfolio in matching the applicant to a role. So that really stood out for me because it's really getting at some of this data. It's like, one, visual design is important. Like, people will judge your work based off of how it looks. It's only natural. And then two, just making things look good is not enough. You need to show that you actually have instructional design skills and you can solve real problems. So there's two sides to that, right? So back to your question, April. I think it's good to just get into Articulate, Storyline, and Rise as soon as you can and start playing around with things, creating interactions, making things. But you need to get feedback. You really need to get feedback from people who know what they're doing. Share it on LinkedIn if you need to. Share it in my Slack community. Just get some other eyes on it. And obviously, it's better if it's people you have connections with so that they can be honest with you. Because if what you have isn't good enough to be competitive in the market, it's better to just not show that at all and to spend more time working on those visual design and development skills before putting stuff out there. But if it meets this minimum bar of professionalism and you apply the basic visual design skills, there's no harm in showing off some simple interactions that are some of your first projects. So I think so again, it depends on where your skills are at. You can create a portfolio as you're learning. That's what I did. I included early projects on my portfolio and removed them down the line once I saw them and was like, oh, that doesn't look good enough. And on my portfolio now, I still have some stuff from 2017 that I cringe to see. And I think most instructional designers, that's the experience. You create something, you're really proud to show it off. A couple months later, you look back at it and you're like, oh man, what was I thinking? Look at this. I can make this so much better now. So I think that's just the nature of, your skills will develop very, very quickly in this field as you're trying new things, attending sessions like this, practicing. So what looks good to you today will look dated to you tomorrow. But as long as you're improving and as long as you meet that minimum bar, I think you're in good shape. All righty. We have another good question from Robbie here. So Robbie is asking, what is the best balance of quantity versus quality in a portfolio? I don't think you need a huge quantity here. If you look at my portfolio, again, I need to work on it. I always do. It's always a process, but I have too much in my portfolio. The right thing is keep it limited to the kind of work that you want to be doing. Again, depends on your goals. As long as you're meeting that flagship project requirement, if you're looking for corporate roles, make sure you have that. But then I think all you need is two other pieces to just show off a little deeper into where you specialize with your skill set. So you don't need a big quantity. There are people who I've helped get a job with just that flagship project and maybe one supporting project. But if you just have that flagship project and a nice portfolio site designed around it that says who you are and what you do, and it's designed well, that is enough to land a really solid instructional design role. So I would say, honestly, do that flagship piece, prioritize that. If you have paid work that you've done or past projects that you want to show off, include those as well, because you've already done them. It doesn't take a ton of time to get one up. But once you have that first project, I would build that portfolio site and start applying places, start getting that portfolio in front of people, because that single project will put you ahead of 99% of the portfolios that you see out there. If executed well, I would say. So once you have that up, then as you're applying for jobs, that's when I would start adding the supporting projects once you have that main one there. And again, it depends. You can always try getting roles with only supporting projects. There's no science to this. But yeah, you don't need more than 3 projects in your portfolio. You honestly don't need more than that one flagship project. But I would say after you do that flagship project and start applying places, don't just get complacent with that flagship project. Keep working and create a couple of nice supporting projects that show off the range of your skill set. And it's really good if you can put a real project on your portfolio site. I know a lot of people offer to volunteer their services when they're getting started, either for past companies or I'm getting distracted by the chat. I see we have a lot going on over here. But Yeah, if you have a real project you can show off, that's a great thing to write up, and sanitize if you need to, but it's a good thing to include. So quality first for sure. Dang, Robbie's on it with these questions. We have another upvoted question from Robbie, and this one is, how important is subject diversity? Can I have all of my sample courses be the same subject? I'm an expert in, say, history, or should I change the subject to show content variety? Another good question, Robbie. Let me take a sip of water and I will get right to that. So I would say subject diversity is important if the subject you're highlighting is not like the niche you want to focus on. So if you are an expert, I mean, history doesn't make a ton of sense when it comes to corporate instructional design, but if you've been working in like healthcare for 20 years and you have super deep subject knowledge, expertise, and connections in that space, and now you want to become an instructional designer in the healthcare space or with healthcare clients, that's when I think it's okay to have all of your samples be about healthcare, okay? But if you want to cast a wider net and you just want to land a corporate role, whether it's in the tech space or healthcare space or manufacturing, or you don't really care, you just want to find a good role that, you know, matches, you know, you just want to find a good team at a good company, you don't care what industry the company is in, I'd say subject diversity is pretty important. So for that flagship project, like the top project on your site, I would suggest doing that on something that you know really well. So solving a problem for a job role that you know really well that you've worked in, or that a family member who you can hop on a call with, or like a friend who you can hop on a call with and do an interview with knows really well. Because for that kind of a project, you really need someone who has that subject matter expertise. What that subject is, it's not so important, okay? Now, with your supporting projects, yeah, I probably wouldn't make them all about that, like, because that's sending a message. It's, if you have 3 projects all about history and you're applying for something unrelated, it's like, seems like you really just want to do history work. Why aren't you applying to history departments at universities, for example? So yeah, I think content variety can only help you unless you're really trying to land a role at a very specific industry and you have some expertise in that industry to back it up. Okay, we have a question here from L. I'm not sure the full first name, but many people who want to enter the field of instructional design are classroom teachers. Any suggestions about how to rework teaching materials we already have for use in an instructional design focused portfolio? Great question and great observation. Yeah, there are so many teachers trying to get out of these toxic work, you know, toxic jobs basically, and stop getting taken advantage of for little pay. So I completely get that. As far as reworking materials, I don't know if I've seen that executed well before, and I don't know if I would recommend doing that. I mean, right, you do a lot of lesson plans, and I imagine you would create these lesson plans that mirror Gagne's 9 events pretty well, I would imagine. But I would suggest just using your skill set, both that you've been using for years, I'm imagining as a teacher, and the new skills that you're learning for this field, and just creating new pieces. So they don't need to be any, again, hour-long experiences, but why not just create a lesson plan, you know, using Gagne's 9 events. I'm not sure if that's a common theory or approach in the education space, but for all the educators who come into touch with Gagne's 9 events, they're like, oh, this is what I've been doing for years. This is what I do on a daily basis. Now you're just giving me some instructional design terms I can use for the work I've already been doing. So that's the kind of stuff you want to mention in a process write-up. Like, I use Gagne's 9 events to design this comprehensive lesson plan to solve this problem for this employee at this company, right? So I would recommend not so much reworking past materials, but using the skill set you've used to create those materials to create new materials that and use the instructional design language to explain how you did that. Because yeah, again, I mean, we had a session with Joe Steuben. I mean, he was coming from academia. He's a history professor, but he had some great insights about how teachers and educators, you know, how their skill sets overlap so well with that of an instructional designer. It's all about reframing those skills to a corporate instructional design audience. And Amy's saying that the screen froze for her. Just refresh if that happened, or if someone could say that in the chat to Amy, that would be good. But I hope that helps. Elle, feel free to ask follow-up questions and I'll get them upvoted to the top. Okay, we have a question from Heather. How do you know when you are ready to launch? For example, stop doing more work on your website for a portfolio for a bit and actually move into the marketing yourself phase. Heather, I think that question will be determined by the market. I think if you have I would get a lot of as much feedback as you can on your site and your work. And there is no perfect, there never will be a perfect. So if you have something up, there's no harm in trying to apply to places. Put that portfolio link at the top of your resume, at the top of your LinkedIn profile. Get it in front of hiring managers or potential clients and measure the reaction. Are you getting a decent percentage of interviews for those applications that you're sending out? Are you getting positive reactions about your portfolio? Because when you have a good portfolio, clients and hiring managers will tell you, they'll be like, yeah, I saw your portfolio and it was amazing. Can we get on a call and talk about this job or this project? So that's a really good way to measure the reaction you're getting. Are people that you want to work for, are they commenting on your portfolio website? And if not, maybe ask for some feedback. What did you think about my portfolio? Do you have any feedback on my portfolio website? And I would just iterate, improve it as you can. There is no perfect time is the short of it. Don't work in a bubble on your own for weeks or months and then just press publish. Try to get feedback from at least one other person. Have some people use the website in front of you. Get some reactions from other instructional designers, because feedback is the most helpful thing when you're making these iterations on visual designs and websites and things like that. Good question, Heather. Okay, a question from another Heather. Heather saw that I have Adobe Xd on my how to become an instructional designer checklist, but how do I use it in my workflow? So Heather, Adobe Xd is a great tool for mocking up visual designs. So that's all I use it for. So in my actual client workflow, I'll do a text-based storyboard, and once we know what content we want to include, I'll mock up some slides in Adobe Xd where it shows basically exactly what the slide will look like once it's in Storyline. The reason for using XD is because it's much faster to iterate. So you can make changes to your slide much more quickly and easily in a tool like Adobe Xd than you can in a tool like Articulate Storyline. So when you do those mockups in XD, you do one layout. So I'm not going to build 20 slides in XD. I'm going to build, here's my question slide layout. Here's my title screen. Here's a content screen. And then that's what I'll show to the client and get approval on. Actually, that's not completely true. I'll build a prototype. But that's a good thing to get approval on. That's a good place to get feedback and make iterations. So then, once you're actually developing in Storyline, the visual design isn't going to change. At that point, it's just copying what you have in XD. Good stuff. Last note about XD, you can also do that to design your website. So in my Webflow website, I first did all of the designs in Adobe Xd before actually developing things in Webflow, because again, it's easier to make changes in XD than it is to make in an actual development tool. Okay, a question from Ashika. Ashika is trying to get a job in instructional design. What kind of projects should I include in my portfolio? I downloaded the Storyline trial. What are the key features I need to include to show that I have a hold on Storyline? So yeah, Ashika, I think we've done a pretty good job at answering that question throughout this session. So yeah, let me know in the chat if you have any follow-up questions about this. But yeah, I think we did a pretty good job at answering this. The main thing we want to show is that you can use your instructional design skill set to solve real-world problems, but you also want to show off some visually appealing, error-free Storyline interactions that use, if possible, more complex interactivity than what's built in. Because those skill sets combined with someone who can communicate well and has a strong instructional design skill set, that's you're going to have absolutely no problem on the corporate instructional design job market. Okay, another question here. How can I showcase online work if I can't publish it from my work PC because of my employer's information security policy? I don't own the authoring software to recreate anything from home. So if that's your situation, you just download an Articulate Storyline trial. So they have a very generous 60-day trial. It's tied to the email address that you use. So yeah, You can publish things from there. Whatever you create or publish during your trial period, it doesn't expire. It doesn't have a watermark. So if you're just trying to learn the tool or publish some stuff for your portfolio, the trial version is completely okay for that. All right, a question from Shaza. Shaza has maybe 2 corporate topics and the rest fun topics. Is it okay to have topics that are not related to corporate as long as it shows your skills? Absolutely, Shaza. The main box that you want to check with the top project on your portfolio is this solving a real world problem? Okay. Another like secondary box that you want to check is this a project that was created for a real audience? Okay, so that's something else that some clients look for particularly, and possibly potential employers. But if you've really thought through this flagship project and you've identified a real world problem that you can solve with it, and maybe your corporate project lines up with that, maybe it doesn't, because again, a lot of the corporate work out there is just churning out e-learning because someone says so. It's not necessarily solving a real world problem. So those don't really check the did this person solve a real world problem with ID box. Okay, but it is good but it looks like you're just talking about which topics to cover. So yeah, I'd say the topic isn't as important as whether or not you're showing off a strong process that you can use to solve real problems. And if anyone needs a hand with this, I mean, this is what we spend the majority of our time on in the Instructional Design Portfolio Bootcamp, is creating a really strong flagship project. And this is something that, we have one-on-one meetings about, and I give feedback on every step of the way with each deliverable, basically, because that first project, again, is going to do the majority of the heavy lifting for you. But great question. Yeah, topics aren't as important. It's fine to have some fun topics. I wouldn't make it your first and maybe not even your second one, but if you're showing off some strong development skills, some strong visual design skills, that's what employers are looking for, because the subject matter is going to change based on who you work for or the project you're working for. So it's not so much the topic that matters in so much as, is it solving a real problem? I know I've been really hammering that point home. So if you're going to take something away, hopefully it will be that. Okay, we have a question from Amy here. I am giving my website a facelift and can't decide how to arrange my samples. Should I divide them into categories and post samples within each category, or should I just list all of my samples together on one page? In short, what is the best layout for an ID portfolio? So Amy, I'm dealing with a similar situation with my portfolio. Pretty much the only client work that I'll agree to at this point is this scenario-based, like simulation kind of projects where I can use this action mapping process and focus on the behaviors we want people to do. But a lot of the stuff on my portfolio is like some older stuff or some stuff I just like had fun with that's like information heavy. But that's not the kind of work I want to do. So I'm at this like weird spot where, I mean, to get to your question, I think what I'm going to do is, I'm going to have like this first and foremost section, like simulation, scenario-based learning experiences or something like that with the actual projects I want to do for clients. And then I'll have what I might call like the archive or something, just with like older projects that other instructional designers might like to see, but that I'm not really interested in doing that work for clients. So that's not exactly getting to your question. One approach you could use is like tagging your projects and then having some kind of mechanism where people can sort the projects by tags. That's something else that I'm considering for myself. But yeah, I mean, categorizing them can never hurt. If you have like an e-learning category and like a storyboards category and you have like multiple projects for each, that seems like a valid approach. But, if you only have 3 to 5 projects or even more, like you don't need to categorize them, but I think I would need more context to give a really solid answer to that. Good stuff. All right, I think we have time for another question or two. Let me see if any have more upvotes. Wow, we've got a lot of questions coming in here. Jeez. Questions are coming in faster than we can answer them, but let's get to a couple more. Patty's asking, how do you get started on a portfolio? What kind of site do you recommend? What do you recommend you include? Yeah, I'm sure these questions came in before we answered some of this stuff, but I would recommend to get started by creating a really solid project that you actually want to show off on a portfolio website, because there's no real point in having a portfolio website if you don't have any projects to show off. So first, create at least one project that you're really proud of. And then if you just want to get something up really fast and you're newer to web development, just, play around with Google Sites just to get something live. Or spend some time looking at my article, evaluating your different site building options, and then embark on that longer site building journey. if you want to invest a little bit, you can't go wrong with Squarespace. They have some really good templates that make it really easy to get started. So I'd actually, if you can spend a little bit of money, which will pay itself off in your first, the first paycheck of your new instructional design role, basically, I would recommend just getting Squarespace, saving yourself a headache and getting something that's going to look a bit nicer and stand out a bit more. Good stuff, everyone. Okay, I'm going to get to a couple more questions. Should a new e-learning designer include keywords on their website, not just in their explanations, but also in the tags? Assuming the answer is yes, any suggestions? Same question, but for LinkedIn as opposed to our website. Heather, you're going to have much more luck optimizing your LinkedIn profile for keywords than you will optimizing your website for keywords. And the reason for that is because search engines are way smarter than they were 10 years ago. And there's a lot more that goes into search engine optimization than the keywords you're using. So if you want to actually rank on Google, that's like a whole other beast. And I would recommend looking into SEO for that. But definitely optimize your LinkedIn profile for keywords because you can get much better visibility on there. And if you have your website right at the top of your LinkedIn profile, it's going to drive traffic there. That's how I landed all of my business the first year I was a freelancer, is because I optimized my LinkedIn profile. They would go from there to my portfolio, and from my portfolio, they would email me about opportunities. So I have a whole article about that. Maybe someone can link it. It's called How to Use LinkedIn Effectively. And I talk about optimizing for keywords in there. So check it out if you haven't already. Last question we're going to get to is from Melina. Which, if any, what are the differences between a portfolio to land a full-time job versus a portfolio to start working as a freelancer? Melina, that is a great question. I don't know if I'm going to have time to do it a ton of justice, but I would say as a freelancer, like you have a bit more. It depends on the types of opportunities you're trying to land, because as a freelancer, like as you grow, you can be much more intentional about the opportunities you take on. Like what we've been talking about is a very good way to also land, to make yourself a good candidate for a very wide pool of freelance and contract opportunities. There is like an endless amount of hourly contract and freelance work out there. If you are a good instructional designer, which goes along with being a good writer, and you're a good developer. Like there's an endless amount of freelance work out there, and the portfolio we've been talking about will really help you land opportunities like that. But if you have a more specific target audience or a more specialized skill set, then you want to try to adjust your positioning and your language and how you present yourself to that specific audience. So for example, if you're looking to work with a very specific type of client, you can be much more intentional with your portfolio or your consulting website, it basically becomes at that point. So if you're looking for just general, you want to land some hourly freelance work, a general portfolio like the one we've been talking about will be very effective. But if you have a very specific niche or specialization you want to focus on, you would do that instead with your website. But thank you everyone for hanging out here with us for this hour. I feel like I have a sore throat. I've said so many words this last hour, but this has been great. There are some really good questions. I'm so glad we got to do this Q&A. And again, if anyone wants to dive deeper with me in the Portfolio Bootcamp, it's going to be a lot of one-on-one coaching, weekly workshops, smaller groups than this, where we can look at everyone's project and give feedback, and a lot of pre-recorded content all about what we talked about today. So the link is below that video if you want to check that out. And I think the next Crowdcast will be in a couple of weeks, and we're diving back into the Articulate Storyline workshops. So thank you, everyone. That bootcamp enrollment will be open until the end of next week. Love the turnout we got here, and this is a lot of fun for me. So I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.